Wow, Paulie, that was very powerful. It was thought-provoking and moving. And I think that one of the things to concentrate on is how people feel, function, and survive in this kind of setting are important in terms of measuring in clinical trials. So how FDA looks at information relating to benefit expectations, risk tolerance, and unmet needs. And I think we heard some compelling stories here about needs that may or may not have been met at various points in time for folks suffering from schizophrenia.
Yes. Yes, and it's important to keep in mind that this is just a glimpse into some of the things these people have struggled with. I mean, as they go from day to day and tell their stories about how just certain events in their life that stand out to them that were so painful and so powerful, and then how they recover from that. I mean, this is just a window into what people in the community have suffered from. So that's what we're here for, though, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Caring for each individual. What can we do to help in this struggle from day to day, and so that eventually it becomes more than just, living day to day and thriving onwards.
Absolutely, Paulie. And I think as our next step, we're going to open discussion up to audience members who are living with schizophrenia and caregivers in order to share their experience. And again, I think we've got polling, phones, and posts that'll all help us getting back to those words that begin with P and are powerful. So if you'd like to share something about your symptoms and how they impact your daily life, we encourage you to call in at any point during this session. The number is 1-703-844-3231. Again, that number is 1-703-844-3231. We really want and need your input live during this program. So we'll be kind of adapting as you come forward, and we're also going to gather additional information here to get us started thinking about these issues. And to do that, we'll use one of our polling questions. For those who answered the earlier questions, you can go back to that web page browser tab that you'd opened on your computer or your phone. And if you just joined us, you can go to pollev.com/SCZ-PFDD. Again, that's pollev.com/SCZ-PFDD. And these questions are for people with schizophrenia and caregivers only. And this question relates to which one symptom of schizophrenia has the greatest impact on you or your loved one's life. A is thoughts or fears related to cleanliness and contamination.
And B, difficulty tolerating uncertainty or disorganization.
C is thoughts about losing control and harming yourself or harming others.
D, repetitive behaviors.
E is loss of motivation or interest in daily activities.
F, seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, or feeling things that others do not.
G is feeling convinced you are extremely special or talented.
H, experiences with telepathy, psychic forces, fortune telling, and the like.
I is feeling afraid.
J, feeling like you are being watched.
And K is not trusting other people. So please select, and we realize some may not have their greatest concern falling into these categories, but nevertheless, it'll help us get a sense of the range of interactions and concerns that individuals may have.
Yeah, and focusing on which one symptom of schizophrenia has the greatest impact on you or the person you care for. I mean, this is very key, right? Because even though we know people can suffer from multiple different symptoms, the one that stands out to you the most, this is something the FDA really would like to know about, right?
Absolutely. And
his concern.
it's important to identify first the symptoms, and then as you get into drug development, understanding how you measure those symptoms so you can look for individuals but also across individuals as to what may be key, and that helps to understand what responses are significant.
Sure. And right now we have, it looks like, loss of motivation or interest in daily activities, and the seeing, hearing, feeling things, etc., that others don't, not trusting other people are the highest number of responses. And then most of the other responses, though, are very even across the board, 5 to 10%.
So, interestingly, the loss of motivation or interest, which hit high, was certainly mentioned by our speakers earlier in terms of negative symptoms.
And the seeing, feeling, hearing things others don't, not trusting, that was mentioned by a couple of people earlier. When folks go off their medication for whatever reason, whether they choose to or it's no longer available.
So these are important commentaries on life experience with schizophrenia, and very much appreciate the audience responses.
Yeah, however difficult it might be for you to pick out the one symptom that really stands out to you, just kind of, go with your instinct, I suppose.
Absolutely.
So I think we're ready to move on then to the next question. So this is, in the last 6 months, which daily activity has been the most difficult for you or your loved one? In the last 6 months, which daily activity has been the most difficult? And option A is expressing emotions.
B is controlling emotions.
C, thinking clearly.
D, relating to others.
E, participating in conversations.
F, concentrating on tasks.
G, remembering things.
H is learning new information.
I, solving problems.
J, making decisions.
K, taking care of yourself.
L is working or school.
And remember, this is over the last 6 months. A daily, kind of like what? Like a normal activity.
Indeed.
Be able to do. And thinking clearly, way up there above the other ones. So I think, in my opinion, Tim, that probably figures into some of these other things too, right?
Almost certainly. It would reflect in, if you can't think clearly, how do you do with solving problems?
Exactly.
And so forth.
Yeah.
Making decisions.
And that, and there we just had 1 or 2 people maybe come in with solving problems. Relating to others, though, participating in conversations. Those are, and those are related to each other. Around 10% or so, working or school.
Yes, and understanding whether these are representative of uncontrolled issues with schizophrenia or with treatments. So understanding that can have some overlay, and that a lot of these things, as you've already pointed out, Paulie, have a degree of overlap and interrelation, some of the symptoms.
Taking care of yourself at also 10%, equal with relating to others, participating in conversations. This is good. Excellent. And so again, in the last 6 months, which daily activity has been the most difficult?
So thinking clearly and being able to function as desired at work or school, understanding a lot of them in early onset disease, maybe in college, high school, and so forth.
Oh, yeah,
so school is an important
and some people
life experience.
Have a job and go to school at the same time.
Right. So I think we can move on here, and I'd like to bring us to the next polling question, if we're set for that.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And for those in the audience, if you would follow along with us, have you or your loved one ever experienced any of the following life events or circumstances? And select all that apply. So you can start with A, struggled with relationships.
B, had difficulty with school or a job.
C, lost job or was expelled from school.
D, was the victim of a crime or abuse.
E, homelessness.
F, was arrested because of behaviors related to schizophrenia.
And G, needed legal services not related to arrest, help with legal guardianship, disability rights, other civil matters.
And so again, you can select multiple options here. Struggled with relationships. So similar to the previous slide, relating to other people. And there's struggled with relationships up at 30%, had difficulty with school or a job. That's relating to other people also.
And interestingly, all of these things impact one's ability to thrive or not, and are usually significant barriers for individuals suffering with schizophrenia.
And the victim of crime or abuse and homelessness, arrest for behaviors related to, those are all coming in as pretty even, also right around 10% of the responses.
Disturbing when you think about what they had to live through in those kind of circumstances.
So please go to the website pollev.com/SCZPFDD. And on this particular question there, number 3, fill out as many as you feel apply to you. You or your loved one ever experienced any of these life events? And when the FDA reviews this, they'll be able to see, will they be able to see, you know, it's anonymous, but which people picked multiple choices?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure of that answer.
Well, fill out whichever ones you feel apply to you.
But we can provide response to that later. And you know, everything is anonymized, so no one is being exposed to confidentiality issues. But I'm not sure our tool tracks the denominator for number of individuals who chose 1, 2, or 3.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, and I believe our Zoom meeting is ready now. So
that's great. So why don't I move us on to that? And thank you. I would like to welcome on Zoom a group of people living with schizophrenia and caregivers who are going to be sharing some of their experiences and perspectives. So welcome, Grace, Dee Dee, Sam, and Chris. Let's return to the questions that just were brought up at the beginning of the session. And I'd like to start with Grace. Of the schizophrenia symptoms that you have had, which have had the greatest impact on your daily life? And please introduce yourself, where you're from, and share with us this story.
My name is Grace, and I'm in the greater Houston area, and I live with schizoaffective disorder. I would say cognitive impairment has the greatest impact on my life.
And are there any specific things with that are most frustrating or impairing daily activities?
It just makes it hard to think clearly and learn new materials and not forget all the time.
Thank you.
Grace, do you have any specific examples that you'd be comfortable with sharing with us?
I need academic accommodations in graduate school now. I didn't need those as an undergraduate or before I got sick. So I need more time to think on tests, so I have extended testing times. And in the daily life, I always forget where my phone is. So that's really hard sometimes.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people have problems keeping track of their phone in every circumstance. They're rascals.
Really frustrating, that's for sure.
Chris, can we ask you as a caregiver to provide some comment on this as well? And
Yes,
again, introduce yourself and so forth.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Chris. I'm in the Western North Carolina area. I'm both the dad and guardian for my 33-year-old adult son who's diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. And I'm also a board-level volunteer for NAMI and our local health agencies. I would really reinforce what I heard from Grace, and that I'd call executive functioning, which is very closely aligned, and how difficulties with executive functioning impact everything from housing to work to managing my son's everyday life activities.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Very, very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris.
And
before we go on to
sure, go
another
ahead.
question and responses from our Zoom panel, how about we switch over to a caller in just a little bit? In a little bit, we're going to go over to Mary from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, calling about the terminology, names of schizophrenia and stigmas, how it affects her loved ones. And while we get Mary kind of queued up there, we do have a written-in comment, and feel free to comment on this, anyone from Zoom, if you have something. We have a written comment from Carol, San Diego, California. Anosognosia has had the biggest impact on my son's schizoaffective/bipolar disorder. He has no insight into his fixed delusions. He will not take meds or see his doctor or partake in any counseling. Well, thank you, Carol. I'm sure that's very challenging. So, yeah.
Indeed, and that helps to further expand the areas of consideration for caretakers and ability to be able to help their loved ones, family members, or friends.
Yeah, most definitely. And let's see, I think we have Mary ready now. Mary, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I am. This is Mary from Milwaukee. I'm the mother of a daughter diagnosed for 37 years with schizoaffective disorder. She also has anosognosia, has not been able to enter recovery. Thanks for this. Thank you very much for this educational presentation and our ability to share. So I have two comments and a question. Some time ago, a person with the diagnosis who I very much respected and liked shared with me the name of care partner versus caregiver, and so I've changed my terminology to that. I think that is really something worth thinking about. And then regarding stigma, manic depression used to be a stigmatizing term for that condition, name change to bipolar. And it seems that the name of schizophrenia may have like stigmatizing effect. And so I'd like to know if there's consideration of renaming this condition. Thank you.
Oh, that's interesting.
Very,
Thank you, Mary.
First of all, great commentary about care partner versus caregiver, and I imagine a number of individuals might feel they're on different steps of that spectrum, depending on stage of control, age of individual, and so forth.
And the language is always changing, especially for something like this that's becoming more of a public discussion. Would this be something, maybe Dee Dee or Chris, could you speak to that, being caregivers and a former caregiver, Dee Dee? Oh, Dee Dee, you're muted right now.
The joys of technology.
How's that?
Yes, there you go.
Speak to the name change or which of that last comment?
Yeah, like instead of caregiver, care partner?
No, I hadn't heard that discussed, and I think that's an excellent suggestion. I've been an advocate for a long time, and there are many of us in the advocacy community who'd like to see all of these illnesses changed from serious mental illness to serious brain disorders, so that mental illness has a connotation that maybe, you can just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's not the case.
Yes.
Yeah, clearly words have impact for folks and what they hear and what their inherent inclinations are. Certainly one way to approach stigma relates to things like name changes. Another is like what we're trying to do is expand education and understanding so that it becomes a much different perception of what's been a misunderstood term.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to Zoom then. I've got a question for you, Sam.
Right.
If you're comfortable with this. Are there activities that are important to you but you currently or were previously unable to do because of schizophrenia?
Well, to introduce myself and what I do, I'm currently a public speaker and active volunteer with NAMI Watcom. And that's something that I used to be unable to do. Public speaking was something that I just couldn't do no matter how hard I tried. So I've actually managed to gain skills over time that used to be impossible. There are still things that I find difficult to do, such as like driving or holding up a job. But largely I am noticing that my symptoms are improving and my ability to function normally is actually improving over time too.
Nice. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that.
Great. Others who would care to comment to that question, either from our Zoom experts or from online?
Yeah. Anybody on Zoom?
No?
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, it's, are there activities that are important to you or the person you cared for, but they were currently, or Dee Dee in your case, I know recently, unable to do because of the schizophrenia?
Well, just to be clear, I live in Northern California, and I was the advocate and parent of a son with schizoaffective disorder for over 20 years. He's now deceased. He died on a hospital psych ward. And in the last few months of his life, and he'd had the best year of his life, he lost his ability to remember things. He couldn't function at work. And a lot of the things that you mentioned here, loss of motivation, not trusting people, delusions came back. So multiple symptomatic issues leading up to the time when he died.
Thank you for sharing that, Dee Dee. That, I can tell that the memory for that is still very powerful. Mm-hmm.
And we know that you all have additional stories to tell, so you can actually expand beyond how we begin the questions as it relates to overall experience. And so to lead into that, let me come back to Chris with the question. How does your schizophrenia or those you cared for impact your life on best days versus worst days?
Well, I think building on what we've heard today, on best days, my son is very high functioning, operates as a peer support specialist and very engaged. On worst days, he's very withdrawn, has challenges with his cognitive functioning and comfort in being around others and going about his daily life. And so I think that the challenge for him, as I've heard with others, is trying to maintain as high a degree of good recovery and engagement in his life as possible and have insight about how to do that.
Yeah. Yep. Makes sense. Does anyone else have anything on that? If not, we'll go on to another call in a little bit.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we'll touch base with Thomas from Wheaton, Illinois, who is actually someone who has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. So we'll be hearing from Thomas in a little bit. In the meantime, a couple of our written comments here. So let's see, Michael, also from Illinois, symptoms that have the most significant impact on her loved one's life is being terrified of the world and nearly everyone. So that's Michael from Illinois about her loved one. And then Jackie in Reno, Nevada says, my 23-year-old daughter felt like she had bugs crawling on her. She had to go outside and use the hose to spray herself off to get the bugs off, and she has cried and begged for help. So our thoughts go out to you, Jackie and Michael. Thank you both for writing in on that. And do we have Thomas from Wheaton, Illinois available now? On the phone? Thomas, can you hear us? No Thomas.
All right. Well,
Would we, well,
Dee Dee had her hand up,
Yeah.
so let's go back to you. I'm guessing best and worst days, but beyond that.
I'm just thinking, as a mother, on his best days, my son was a person you would want to have as your friend. He had tons of friends. He always looked out for the underdog. He was very good at expressing gratitude and appreciation. He organized a Parents Appreciation Day when he was in college, thanking parents. And so the juxtaposition for the person he was on his good days to the person that he acted as on his worst days. He would become aggressive and violent and hateful and scaring me, scaring his sisters. He would take off and fly to foreign countries, and I would have to get him back home. He'd end up in jail, and I'd have to drive to wherever he was to pick him up. And I knew this wasn't him, and it was just gut-wrenching as a mother to know who the real person was inside of all that, and to not have other people know who that kind, real, valued person was.
And Dee Dee, to carry on just a bit further, I mean, you've taken this educational process far beyond just discussion and have authored a book. Would you care to talk a bit about that?
When my son died, quite a few people were irate with our system. They wanted me to sue doctors and hospitals and the Kaiser system. And I was exhausted after 20 years of advocacy, and I knew it wouldn't bring him back. So instead, I used my energy. I wrote. It just so happened I was writing a daily diary, which turned out to be the last year of my son's life. So I actually captured his life, and he was posting comments on Facebook all that year, and I went back and I attached his comments to my comments for each day. That turned into a gold medal winning memoir, Sooner Than Tomorrow, a mother's diary about mental illness, family, and everyday life. At the same time, I had a blog, and I was posting the stories of moms from all over the country. And I thought these stories need greater exposure. So I collected those stories into the second book, which is called Tomorrow Was Yesterday, Explosive First-Person Indictments Against the U.S. Mental Health System, Mothers Across the Nation, Tell It Like It Is. And that one is Silver Medal for Social Change and Social Justice.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you. And you know, those caregiver impressions from both you and Chris are very compelling. Let me ask Sam if you'd be willing to comment on this, the bookends, the best days versus worst days.
Well, most of my days are actually pretty good at this point in my life. Since I take medication every single day, and it actually works very well for me personally, I largely don't have too many bad days, or they're very rare and easy to cope with. There have been points in my life, though, where, you know, psychosis was more of an issue, and I wasn't myself during those times. And sometimes, you know, it worried my family that, you know, they didn't know if I would be able to be brought back. I feel very fortunate that I was able to find treatment and that I've stuck with it these years. So.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for that. And it's a, you know, a story of hope and being able to conquer that. Thank you.
Before we go on to any of the other Zoom participants, we're going to have Phyllis in upstate New York come on in just a minute. Or is Phyllis already there, or do we need a minute?
I'm
Phyllis,
ready.
can you hear? Hi, Phyllis. How are you?
Hi. Thank you. I'm calling because I have a son. His older sister has schizoaffective disorder. He began to develop symptoms similar to hers over the past 3 or 4 years, and refused to acknowledge that there was anything wrong. And it would come and go. But as of about 1.5 years ago, he became unable to work. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't function, but he would not go and get checked out because he couldn't believe that he had the same illness as his sister, I believe. He had delusions, he had paranoia, he had visual and auditory hallucinations. He became convinced that we weren't his parents, that he was the son of a rich individual and was supporting the entire United States with his trust fund, all of it totally, crazy. And we couldn't get him to go see help. He moved away. He rallied at times and seemed to be able to function at times, and moved away, but sustained, and got a job actually in a distant state, And then he sustained a head injury, a concussion, and shortly thereafter he became threatening to self and others, which he had never been before, which is why we could never get him care, because we couldn't convince him to go, and since he wasn't a threat to himself or others until that time, we couldn't get him there. But when he became threatening, he began to send us emails and texts that were frightening, and I actually got a court order in this distant state to get him taken in for an evaluation, 72-hour eval. But the state police in that state decided that when they talked with him that he didn't quite meet their criteria, and they got the judge to cancel that order. A month later, he was arrested at the airport with guns, and he's been incarcerated ever since. It took 11 months for him to even get a full psych eval. And he's currently being evaluated, and hopefully will get some treatment. So this is, a devastating thing that you can't get help for an individual until they become a criminal. And that's just tragic.
Well, very true. And hopefully that will work out good for you and your family. So good fortune to you all there. Thank you for calling in.
And I think it's a common experience of other people where they can't get the help for their loved one until that individual actually harms or becomes a serious threat for harm.
Thank you, Phyllis.
It's a great observation, and I think what you share. What do those worst days mean? What do they constitute, and how do we better deal with the barriers in those type of situations? And to also understand what influences most the ability to have those best days.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the difference between every state's interpretation of, that threat to self or others is also an amazing difference between Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Alaska. They're all different. And I think there needs to be some uniformity.
Great observation. The licensing of medical practitioners, pharmacists, nurses are all done on a state basis instead of nationally. And so that's certainly another area that to promote consistent practice standards, it's a little more challenging than if it was more nationally. And that's one of the reasons we're fortunate that we have a Food and Drug Administration that provides national as opposed to state by state coverage. So I think that's one thing we can be grateful we don't have to wrestle with.
Thank you so much for calling, Phyllis. We're going to move on to some of our Zoom participants again. So looks like Chris has his hand up. Go ahead, Chris.
One thing that I wanted to just offer in our area, we are certainly experiencing many cost-driven downgrades in care provider positions. So psychiatrists being replaced by PA med managers or nurse practitioners. Many of these folks are very dedicated, but their experience level, understanding of the interactions between different types of medications, and just knowledge of how the whole patient works isn't the same. And it's resulting in some missed opportunities and sometimes some mistakes. And I think with it, there's a similar effort around fully integrated care, but we're really struggling through the reality that the system that's designed to deliver whole person integrated care is really disintegrated. So for us as advocates, there's an awful lot of work being done trying to link various people in the care system together to deliver this integrated care that's vital for the social psycho supports on top of good medication management.
It's a great observation, Chris, and I think we saw the amplification of those kind of disconnects, especially during the recent COVID experiences we've had, where some of those gaps and overlaps became much more visible. I know folks are trying to use what has occurred there as teaching cases, learning points, and we'll hope for the best, but we all need to continue to advocate for attention to those disconnects. Dee Dee?
I'd just like to second what Chris just said and the previous caller. There's a theory held by some that systems cause structural damage and actually harm individuals. I guess I would concur with that, and it's the judicial system, the political system, the mental health system. I feel like I watched my son Pat die because the mental health system is so tied up in philosophic and bureaucratic knots that it's lost its capacity to help.
Yeah, I think there's, in my opinion, there's a lot of people who might agree that there's a lot of room for improvement. I mean, that's exactly why we're having this seminar, and we're so happy for you all participating to get this kind of information that will hopefully help going forward. You know, get the compassion in where it's needed. And so, actually, if it's all right with everybody, could we maybe put another question out to you all, particularly to Grace and Sam, but of course anyone can answer this. Like, right along with what Dee Dee was just talking about, like what worries you most about your schizophrenia? Like, let's say you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing that might cross your mind if you feel maybe you're not having that good of a morning? You know, what's the first thing that comes to your mind maybe about your schizophrenia? You go ahead, Grace.
I would worry a lot about getting dementia because the cognitive impairments, I'm afraid they're going to get worse over time. And then when I'm older, that I won't be able to take care of myself as well as I can now. And going back to the worst days and the best days, I can take care of myself pretty well on my best days, but on the worst days, I need to be hospitalized for suicidal ideation or just paranoia. But luckily, I've had 10-year gaps between both those hospitalizations.
Say, can I ask Grace real quick, that 10-year gap, does that seem to be something that's repeated itself throughout your life?
Oh, no. Well, I've had it for about 20 years, so that's like the hospitalization happened in my late 20s and it happened again recently. So hopefully it won't keep happening at those 10-year intervals. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's natural to worry anytime someone has health issues to worry about, especially their children or their loved ones. What's that safety net, and how do we make sure that those kinds of things are present and don't let folks slip through? So very nice observation. Thank you. Others that would care to comment on that? Sam, did I see you?
Regarding worries for schizophrenia or my personal condition?
Over time, yeah.
Fine. I'm not entirely worried. I'm not really anxious so much about symptoms getting worse, other than maybe if I do ever lose access to medication, I'm not sure what I would be able to do in that hypothetical case. Because I do know that over time, symptoms can get worse if you don't stick with the treatment that actually addresses the symptoms. So I'm just doing what I can for now to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So doing everything you can to make sure you stay on the treatments that work best for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dee Dee?
I'd like to speak to worst fears of, what was that phrase? Caregiving partners. I live in an over 55 community, and for the last 7 years, I've run a support group for family members here. And I work mostly with moms, a few dads in their 80s and 90s who are the only persons left to try to help their adult child or grandchild. And they're struggling with two fears. One is when this person's behavior comes so bad that I can no longer, for my own safety, let them live in my house, then I'm confronted with a biblical choice of making that loved one leave, knowing that then they're going to be homeless. No one should ever have to make that kind of decision for a child or a grandchild. Their second concern is what happens when I'm no longer around. They're trying so hard to navigate a system which gives no guidance or guidelines. And they seem to find no safety nets. And so when they pass on, what is going to happen to that adult child or grandchild? And it weighs heavily on this population.
Very true.
It's a challenging point, and just having those worries and preparing our children or other loved ones for these kind of circumstances certainly have barriers in this particular condition. So your observation is sage. I wish we had some answer.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Chris and then Sam? Yeah.
I was just going to build on that. In the state of North Carolina, we've operated for 5 or so years under the Olmstead Act, which was a settlement act mandated by the federal government to ensure that the state of North Carolina would more proactively work to move individuals in congregate home settings to independent housing and prevent others from going into congregate homes. Unfortunately for us, and perhaps not unique, is that there's been a sort of quiet cutting of the preparatory and sustaining services that enable individuals to live independently successfully over time. So the state's well aware that we have what's called separations, and those people who fail in independent living and end up back in congregate care. And I think that Dee Dee puts her finger on a topic I spent a great deal of time in after 10 years as a family giver, family support giver, of families coming asking this question as to what will happen to their loved one. Locally, what we're focused on is trying to expand permanent supported housing. And you mentioned the club format, some kind of activity that seeks to put in some additional support layers beyond the simple efforts that, at least in our part of the country, are designed to promote independence with the goal of getting individuals out of the support system. So we're trying to think about supports that will then enable successful recovery and independence, as opposed to simply getting people out of the support system that we don't believe over time will succeed.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for that observation. Actually, during the afternoon part of the session, we're going to talk about non-medical interventions and trying to get an understanding of the scope of things, and also where some kinds of such support elements may compromise otherwise progress with medications and so forth.
Well, let's go to a couple of other comments for now. We've got a couple of other written comments.
Great.
And then right after that, I'll read one more comment, and then we actually have Lynn from Fairbanks, Alaska, who will be coming in on the phone for us in about a minute. She's a caregiver. So one of our written comments, though, has been from Mark in Austin, Texas. The worst symptom of my son's schizophrenia is complete lack of insight. This stymies treatment and medication compliance. So again, another comment on the lack of insight there, the anosognosia. And let's see here. Do we have Lynn ready on the phone? Lynn, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, Lynn.
Great.
Go right ahead. It's good to have you here.
Hi there. Thank you. I think I'm focused on, you had asked about worst and best symptoms. For us, the worst has been self-harming given psychotic breakthroughs in psychosis. Our daughter has had a decade of severe eating disorder early on and into a long-term hospitalization in Massachusetts State Hospital, whereas caregivers as parents, we commuted to there being only one facility in the country we could find that treated both a substance disorder, eating disorder, and psychosis. So as caregivers now, she has been able to move back to Alaska. We have a community hospital over the last 2 years. She has been in the hospital more days than than at home. There are not facilities in between appropriate or safe for the level of care she needs. And that level of care, given self-harm events and suicidality, given the psychosis, it's either been hospital or home. And when she is home, up to today, we are the family members doing the 24/7 care and observation, symptom, listening to those, because if she does become symptomatic, she is susceptible to life-threatening and very serious self-harm.
Well, I'm sure that has been quite a struggle, and all that distance to travel. It's good to know that there's now something there in Alaska. Thank you, Lynn, for calling in and letting us know about that. We appreciate that.
Yeah, it's our locked unit, and so locked units are hard to find with psychiatric care unless, of course, parents have had to face incarcerations like Phyllis had mentioned. So and I'll stay tuned in the treatment part of it, but because our community hospital has been able to prescribe, and we as a family have been able to manage going on clozapine over the last, since July, that the med is making a difference.
Good.
And the management, though, all the transportation, and then one-to-one is on the family.
Thank you. It's good to know you're going to stay tuned for the second part of the show. The meeting. So thank you again, Lynn. And I think Dee Dee had her hand up there. So.
To dig a little deeper into that, and she's speaking of the lack of facilities for their particular needs. And even if you find a facility as a parent or care partner, then you have to deal with the stigma of being that parent or care partner. We tried to do everything right. My son had an advanced care directive. I was on that. And in his final hospitalization, I could not, over a 2-week period, get a doctor to call me or talk to me about his condition. And I finally got a phone call from a doctor. He said, "I'm sorry, your son died 15 minutes ago." You know, I didn't know how to breach that resistance on the part of the hospital and the system to not even be allowed to speak with them. So there's a lot of work to do once you even get into a facility or a system.
Well, all the more reason why I think that's awesome that you have your book and what you did on Facebook, Dee Dee, telling your story like that. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think what we've heard from many of you commenting is, the distressing nature of having to care for an individual who's not responded to therapy or resists therapy. So it probably leads to a discussion of, the next question was, would you define you or your caretaking partner's schizophrenia as well managed? And if not, what about the condition is most challenging to handle? And maybe turning that around, what would be the unmet needs that would help individuals with new medications? What would be your expectations for benefit and tolerance for risk factors in order to avoid a number of these critical care situations? So just some thoughts about what are some of those unmet needs? We heard about thinking not being clear and so forth, if there were medicines with those kind of things. Well, if you had the magic wand you could wave and say, if I could just have this kind of medication available, this is what it would change, improve,
Interacting
avoid.
with other people, and yeah. Anyone care to respond about that? Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
I consider the black box warnings a public service, and if a new drug came out or a new treatment, and there were some risks associated with it, I would really appreciate, especially if it was a serious risk, to have those warnings so that I could work with my prescriber and mental health professional to decide, are those risks worth the benefits, and make that decision, because everybody's different. and respond differently. But if those warnings aren't there, then you're just kind of going into it without knowing what to expect.
Yeah,
Very good. That's quite
the
helpful.
black box thing is, yeah, that's huge, I think. Mhm. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say, in my personal experience, what probably helped me gain the most insight on my illness was actually having a psychiatrist who was able to explain the condition very well to me and was able to explain the risks behind certain medications and what they actually physically would do for my brain. I think it also helped to participate in a clinical trial at the NIH, where I was able to get even more information about the biological basis of schizophrenia and how it kind of, it made it clear to me that there was something that I would need to do. I would have to be compliant with meds and also therapy and other types of treatment, and also just be open to support from friends, family, and loved ones. I think that these are all things that beyond medication are equally important. And if there was just a magic pill that could give somebody, insight on whether or not they have a condition, that would be great. But I think when it comes down to it, how we communicate with each other as patients and professionals is very crucial to that process.
And what I hear you saying, Sam, is that perhaps if part of treatment was to give people more information on the actual physical, biological state of their own body, maybe, or brain?
Definitely, yes. I think that would make it easier for people to accept that they have a mental health condition if there was more explanation of the biological basis.
It's interesting, yeah. Thank you. Well, let's see. Let's go to a couple of other comments we've had written in here. I'm going to go down to, we have Lisa from Goldsboro, North Carolina. She wrote in and said, on the best days, he is happy and living normally. On worst days, he's physically attacking me or others. So let me go back through that. So Lisa wrote in, evidently Lisa's a caregiver. On his best days, he's happy and living normally. On worst days, he is physically attacking me or others. Thank you for writing in with that, Lisa. And we also got a comment from Lois in Phoenix, Arizona. When my daughter lost her last job almost 20 years ago, she qualified for disability. Since then, she has endured a few audits, which are so stressful for her, she comes close to needing hospitalization. And I think we're going to hear a little more of that in the second part of the meeting here also, the impacts of treatment and experiences. So, yeah.
Yeah, Chris.
I just wanted to build on what Sam just said, in that we've talked a bunch this morning about some common comorbidities and enabling elements to help individuals to perform at their best and maintain recovery. What I would love to see is more study done around the package of care, less art, more science around things like individuals on clozapine. Do you institute right away a metformin substance, for instance, to anticipate weight gain? Do you recognize that there are different treatment or medications that could help with some of the issues around cognition that we've spoken about? What I've observed over many different caregivers with my son over these years is that each caregiver sort of has their own experienced formula and artwork that they like to pursue, and different opinions about how different formulas may work. And as part of the overall treatment modality, it would be great for the FDA to be thinking about how the package of medications and supports really optimize results for the individual.
Well, it's a great observation. Certainly we heard things from Dr. Keshavan earlier about multiple factors that might interplay, both in terms of root causes and how they play out. Are there genetic factors, neuronal pruning, neurotransmitters that we might be able to measure? I think some of the hope here may be viewed in the context of how we dealt with things, serious disorders like cancers in the past, and how through observing and learning about what some of those root causes were, genetic or otherwise, how we may then have new ways of intervention. So that doesn't give us an answer now, but to build on those kind of pathways, and also the notion of combined therapies. So thinking back 30 to 40 years ago and how we were dealing with those kind of serious diseases and what incredible progress has been made, I think there's definitely hope for this community as well, for those kind of ongoing discoveries and things that will be further developed. And that's why I think it's really exciting that FDA and drug developers and others are listening in to what you all feel are unmet needs or concerns that might be addressed by future developments. Dee Dee?
I'd like to see the age range of onset expanded. We read so often that this begins schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia begins to present in teenage years or in adult years. From my own experience, I believe my son was born with this. I think he struggled with his condition from the time he was a toddler, and I knew nothing about mental illness, and I think a lot of symptoms can mock normal passages like terrible twos. And when I worked in the CSU system in 2000, and they were already developing a course on infant mental illness. I'd like to see that given more attention so that we possibly can, begin help sooner and not wait till damage has been done to the brain and it's harder to give them continuing improvement at that point.
Well, we saw earlier that there were quite a lot of respondents to one of the polling questions where a lot of people believe their first symptoms, and kind of like what Chris and Dee Dee are talking about, what you were talking about with, is this a gut feeling or something, or is it actual proof, and is there some kind of connection there? So is there anyone else who can speak to what Dee Dee was just saying, like anything like in your opinion, was there something that might help the FDA determine, like, should we do more studies on or with people who are under 18? Any of you have any, whether it's a gut feeling or science, or that things may have happened in, youth?
Chris?
I just quickly agree with what Dee Dee said. I've spoken to a few families, and certainly is the situation in our family where suddenly we woke up one day and the individual was beginning to display symptoms of mental health issues. This was sort of a lifelong issue to include things like ADHD, depression, some paranoia, anxiety, issues that developed over time at different stages of life and were always thought of as just being sort of independent aspects of the individual's personality and life experience. But I would imagine that the FDA and others have enough study now to be able to be quite insightful about what are some of the leading indicators for individuals who end up with these diagnoses, and to get ahead of it.
That's a great observation. Earlier diagnoses or earlier clues that would help to lead to more refined diagnostic tests would be a great advance. And, I think we would likely all agree that the first step in progress is awareness of issues, awareness of gaps in therapy needs, unmet needs of patients that can then be built on. More studies by the National Institutes of Health, drug developers, working in concert with FDA and others, think are the ways that, again, we can be hopeful. And actually, one of the big ways to enhance awareness is exactly what you're all doing here. You're sharing things that previously have not been able to be aired with this kind of broader audience, people who are doing the kinds of research. So, we're incredibly appreciative of all you are bringing to them and enhancing that awareness, which will lead to more thoughtful research and development.
Yeah. Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's another written comment here I'd like to share. kind of along these same lines, we have a written comment from Kathleen in Virginia. She says, my loved one suffers from anosognosia. I find this symptom prevents him from successfully adhering to a medication plan. He's adamant that the hallucinations and delusions are real, not symptoms of a disease. Many of the psychotic medications have worked to reduce the hallucinations and delusions, but the belief of not being ill remains as he quickly stops taking the prescription. And this stood out to me, Tim, because what are we teaching our children? If they're displaying something, as Chris mentioned, you mentioned ADHD, which is commonly diagnosed in several children and teens. So is this something where, perhaps any of you have experience with, if you'd been told at an earlier age that don't deny this evidence that you may have something called schizophrenia? Do you think that could it have been like, oh, okay, that's good to know. Your parents may have benefited from that, the knowledge of it, so that you would take the medication? Do you know what I mean? The anosognosia tends to be kind of a common thread with people. So this way, you're believing you have a condition you need to take medication for.
Yeah. Sam?
Yeah, I will say the way we educate people about mental illness is a crucial step in making sure people actually know that they have a condition or are willing to accept that they might have a mental illness. Because some people are misinformed about what schizophrenia is like and whether or not a person can live successfully with it. And the truth is, there are many people that live with all sorts of mental illnesses that still can live perfectly normal and high-functioning lives compared to others. And I think if we break apart that kind of misconception and address that it's still an issue that people are going to have to seek help for, I think that if we tell especially young people that there's hope, even if you do have a mental health condition, be it depression or schizophrenia or any other diagnosis, I think it's important to know that it's not going to be forever or always.
It's a great observation. We've obviously heard from several of you and from folks providing comments that there has been remarkable progress in your individual cases, and that's certainly uplifting. And the question is, how do we expand that kind of effect further? Any other?
We don't have any callers that are ready now. Let's go to a couple of other written comments.
Sure.
We've got quite a few people writing in, so thank you all for that. Lisa in New Hampshire says, my adult son was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2015. On his best days, he socializes with people and carry on a simple, uncomplicated conversation. On the most difficult days, he chants offensive words over and over and can't leave his bed. Well, thank you, Lisa, for sharing your story with us there. And we also have a comment from Amanda, Wilson County, Tennessee. Some days I'm a high-functioning multitasker who can operate on multiple levels, and I can unlock my true personal best and achieve the highest of standards. Then 3 days later, I have mush brain and cannot express or explain a thing and cannot remember anything. I have word salad. It's a struggle just to get a thought out of my mouth or a focus on the task at hand. Now, thank you also, Amanda, for sharing that. Yes, quite the, quite the dichotomy in behavior there that we see in that I've seen in a lot of people. Anyone in Zoom care to comment on something along those lines? Kind of like a sudden change, maybe, and if that's related to some kind of a treatment, whether it be medication or otherwise? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Well, after 4.5 years of really remarkable recovery for my son, his treatment managers were trying to address a correlative symptom, but sort of got it wrong despite really hard work. And after ending up in the hospitals that he just was discharged from after a couple of weeks. To stabilize him again, what we were counseled with those doctors is that the concept that his decline was like almost like pinpricking a balloon, and that what they were trying to explain was there was sort of a gradual decline in his effective living capability that was difficult to notice until sudden symptoms developed, and thus his return to high functioning would take a similar amount of time. And I think that what we've learned is to be ever vigilant to signals of changes in behavior and reporting feelings and symptomology that my son was actually sharing with us, but people were tending to just sort of ignore because he had been in such wonderful high functioning for so long. And once again, it sort of brings us back to this question of the awareness and sensitivity of the caregiving community to signals that would act them to, or prompt them to act before it suddenly becomes a crisis.
Yeah, it is interesting how you've observed that sometimes if we're so close to an individual, a family member, a patient, or so forth, that we don't see some of those subtle signs because we're there right with them, and it becomes less noticeable. And you know that's certainly incumbent upon practitioners to be able to recognize that from periodic visits. You're absolutely right. I wish there were some way to do that continuing education type program to help re-alert practice colleagues. You know, it's an incredibly difficult environment out there with COVID atop of everything else, and not making excuses, just observations. Mm-hmm. So we've covered a number of the questions that we had hoped to raise, but wanted to be sure that we offered an opportunity, especially for our Zoom panelists, to offer any additional comments, advice, and so forth. Again, you have an audience here, which includes not only key FDA leaders and those who review the products that are proposed for treatment of schizophrenia and other illnesses, but also those who are developing drugs and those who may be important caretakers for patients on a day-to-day basis. So if each of you would like to comment, if there's something that you would say to them, some request, some observation, that you have their attention. Anyone care to start? Dee Dee?
I'm not sure this is really a direct response to your question there. I would just like, and I don't know that this is something that the FDA can address, but in my son's case, the systemic abuse continued even in death because I had to fight like hell to get an autopsy. The hospital didn't want me to have an autopsy performed. My son's body remained on ice for a week while I fought with them. I finally got the county coroner to take charge, and then it was another 6 months of struggle to get the autopsy and the autopsy results, which were very unsatisfying and inconclusive. Again, this goes back to what I had said previously about structural damage from systems. And I'm sorry if I got sidetracked from your question, but it was just a detail that occurred to me that I wanted to express.
Well, thank you, Dee Dee. That's interesting because actually I'm seeing a note here also, kind of a common thread, worries for the future. So that's something in the case of when your son passed, you didn't even know you were going to have to worry about that. And so it's important to tell that story, I think, those details, just in case that might happen to someone else. Why don't we go around to our different panelists, just if there's anything you'd like to touch on, worries for the future, just in general, whether it's something specific to you, but again, keeping in mind, we're trying to collect information here, like for the FDA and for doctors and for research. Sam, can we go to you? Is there anything, worries you may have for the future?
Yeah, I will say that as far as inpatient treatment goes, like Dee Dee was mentioning, and how a lot of the time there are abuses and cases of malpractice that completely go unaddressed in the healthcare system. And oftentimes there are cases where people struggling with mental illness are mistreated, injured, and psychologically abused, you name it, and there's not really anything done about it. I think that that is a major reason why a lot of people are afraid to seek help or afraid to even address their own mental health struggles, even if they are aware of the symptoms. I will say I've seen the best and worst that the system has to offer. There have been hospitals where I felt respected as a patient. I felt that I was getting the care I needed, but other times there just wasn't care at all. Frankly, at one point at a local hospital, I was actually just left on the floor when I fainted and nobody helped me up. I had a broken arm. I was struggling with psychosis at the same time. So just to contrast that with maybe something more positive, when I was at the NIH, there was a lot of communication with faculty, and they were always asking whether or not I wanted to be there. And, it was, mostly voluntary, my participation in the clinical trial at the NIH. And I would like to see a lot of changes made to how the inpatient mental health system works. And I would like to see more empathy expressed from professionals towards people struggling, because a lot of us are suffering not just with our own conditions, but with the treatment we receive from people that should be helping us.
That's very powerful, Sam. Thank you. Grace, would you like to comment on that? Any worries for the future you have?
Mine's more about the pipeline, the future pipeline of the medications coming through, if there's any new developments. I'm worried that it'll just shrivel up, or that there's no new innovation in like the formulas, because I'm actually about to switch medications myself, and I find my options are kind of limited based off of my experience with all the other ones I've tried. So to have options in the future would be really important to me.
Well, good fortune to you on your new treatment there. Chris, any comments on that? Worries for the future?
I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. First is that going through the journey of individuals experiencing their mental health, and most everyone that I know, certainly the case with my son, is that he was sort of a walking pharmacological experiment until the right medication was found. I think there's very clear understanding and knowledge about the side effects of these medications. We've spoken a great deal about how this disease onsets early in an individual's life. So the importance of medications as a foundation to successful recovery is vital, but they come with a well-known set of side effects. And I think everything from flat affect to brain fog and on that we've spoken about, weight gain, that these are things that should deserve much attention, because my experience is they pay as large or have as large an effect to medication compliance for the young adult who's trying to establish themselves in the world as anything else. And then separately, I would add that each time that I experience as a care partner with my son an incident like we've just recently gone through, it becomes a learning experience to go back to the system and talk about what's been learned and where the breakdowns existed, both in terms of the disintegration of care providers, in terms of not coordinating their care in a way that would have been effective. Things like the hospital discovering that they've never really had to deal with a guardianship where a patient didn't want to see their guardian, and they didn't quite know what to do with that. And so, there's just a lot of things that we learn along the way. And I think having the diligence to go back and improve the system versus sort of shrug it off is really important.
Yeah, focusing on those common threads, and that's again like the importance of doing the polling questions, which are going to be available for some time. So, right.
You bet. And sage advice. I think we would all benefit from doing lessons learned on any type of important experiences we've had. And so it's, a great reminder to have drug developers look at what have been the best versus most challenging practices in trials. How can we make the experience better for those who volunteer and so forth? So there's a number of things that can enhance compliance and medication adherence. Thank you for that.
Well, we're about 5 minutes from our break, so are there any last minute comments anyone would like to make on Zoom?
I'd just like to say thank you for having this forum. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for being here.
Well,
Yeah.
great. So, Polly, any other comments from you?
No, I'm good.
Well, then let me take the opportunity to say thank you, everyone, for sharing. It was incredibly powerful, and at points distressing to hear these stories, to help shine the light on what the unmet needs in schizophrenia may be. And we appreciate both your courage and your candor in how you've spoken up about your respective experiences. And I just want to call out specifically for Grace, for Dee Dee, for Chris, for Sam, for really spending so much time and sharing your insights and experiences with us. And to also give special thanks to everyone who had called in or written in. We realize this really takes a leap of faith, but I want to assure you that that faith will be justified by what we will see in this Voice of the Patient summary that will go to FDA and be publicly available. So now it's time for us to take a short break, understanding that folks may have appetites or other biologic imperatives to address, and we respect that. If you hadn't had a chance to get through or submit a comment yet, don't worry. You'll get another opportunity to participate in the second session on current and future treatments. So for now, what we are going to do is take a 30-minute break. We will return promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, that's 4 p.m. Pacific Time, and anything in between. And we'll see you back here then. But again, our sincere thanks and respect for all you are doing for your fellow families and those who have the affliction of schizophrenia. Thank you again, and we'll see you in just a few minutes.